for annual PhillyCHI show and tell. Woo! This is where air horns would be sounding off if we could figure out how to share sound on Zoom properly. But since you don't have that, you have me. So, and the rest of our lovely PhillyCHI board. I'm the board chair, Casey Meredith. Along here on the call on some screens, we have our vice chair, Veen Wen, and our secretary, Jesse Melser, our community coordinator, Ellery Seither, Alex McNally, our social media coordinator, and Jonathan Nitka, our treasurer, which is basically just sponsorship coordinator, a subtle plug for later, promise you. And let's not forget Epiphany Liu, our mentorship coordinator. A lot of coordinators here. And that's why this event is happening, because we've all come together to bring you this beautiful show and tell. If this is your first time, it's basically just like it's exactly what it sounds like. Three lovely individuals here tonight are going to be sharing a case study or a project of sorts that they have worked on, and do some like Q&A after that. So around 6:45, we'll toss it over to Angie Belenich. She's going to be talking about her project, Augmented Reality AR, Data Visualizations for Building Financial Acumen. It's very cool. All of these are very cool. And then after that, we'll hear from Camila Quintana, who will talk about her project, providing the foundation for bilingual accessibility for 500 plus school districts. And lastly, Hannah Strayline with Don't Put Me on Hold, the evolution of call transfer. And this is being recorded, by the way, and will be put on our YouTube channel. So if you ever want to go back to it, it will be there. Oh, and lastly, we'll be talking about the Rosenfeld's book raffle. We raffle off 3 books every event. They are ebooks, so stay tuned for that. And we'll be talking about our 2025 board applications. We have several spots opening up, and we'd love for you guys to come join and coordinate with us. Just want to say thank you so much to our annual sponsors, Rosenfeld Books. They give us the books. They have really cool books on several different UX topics, and Bentley Systems. Just wanted to take a pause here, talk about who we are in case this is your first PhillyCHI event. We are a branch of the larger ACM Association for Computing Machinery, SIG-CHI. It's a like US branch. So yeah, but PhillyCHI, pronounced Chi, that does come up a lot. Computer human interaction group that does, spread the gamut of interdisciplinary topics such as like UX, human computer interaction, everything in between like IA and usability, as well as like graphic and visual design, to other parts of design such as service design as well. We really like have done many different events with those topics. Just recently we did an accessibility talk, partnering with Ally here in Philly. And we do dedicate our working culture of knowledge to like community building. And first and foremost, this is incredibly important today. PhillyCHI implicitly supports a safe, positive environment for professionals to gather, converse, and explore interests in user experience. And we don't tolerate anything beyond that. So if you witness any unacceptable behavior, please notify a board member. We really want to promote a safe environment. So yes, job time. If you at your company are hiring, please post that in the chat and fire away, like
Yeah,
at
I'm
any
just
point.
posting in the chat. There's a Google sheet that we have. The first tab is a networking sheet. So if you want to connect with anyone else here, put your info in there. Totally optional. And then the second tab is job time. So if you know of any roles that are open, UX are related, just share them in there. And I'll post this again at the end of the call, but we won't be sharing the link out after the meeting. So if you want to reference it later, just save that link.
Thank you so much, Ellery. It's dark times out there. All right, so did want to say this actually last, but we're saying it first anyway. So I'll go over this again, but we need board members. Yay. There's so many of you who have gone to several events, which makes you perfect candidates for being on the board. What does that mean? It's a completely volunteer position, but it is somewhat of a year-long commitment. We do 6 to 8 events per year, virtual and in person. So being in the Philly area is super crucial to that, fortunately or fortunately for you. And we do bi-weekly virtual board meetings to help put these on and keep the PhillyCHI wheels churning smoothly. I will be remaining board chair for next year, and Jesse Melser, our secretary, is going to be our new vice chair. Woo! Let's go. Previously secretary. But we have every other role open: secretary, sponsorship coordinator, which is treasurer. We have to call it treasurer because we're part of SIG-Chi. So don't get scared by treasurer. Mentorship and volunteer coordinator, social media coordinator, community coordinator, and we're always looking for mentors and volunteers to build out our growing mentorship program. Applications are open and they're due midnight on December 6th. And look at that lovely QR code right there. That's for you to go to the link. And we'll post the link to the board apps in the chat as well, just so you don't forget. All right, great. And introducing our first presenter, Angie. So in just a short minute, Angie's gonna take it over. Like I said, augmented reality, AR data visualization for building financial acumen. Angie is a UX designer at Vanguard and also a lovely person. So Angie, take it away.
Thanks so much, Casey. Excited to be presenting tonight.
Of course. Yeah, so
Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So like Casey said, I'm Angie Belenich, and I'm going to be presenting on augmented reality data visualizations for building financial acumen. Oh yeah, so just a brief introduction. Like Casey said, I'm a UX designer at Vanguard. I've been there for 4 years. 3 of those years spent working on the mobile and emerging tech department, although we don't really do much emerging tech there right now, and I'm hoping to learn more so we can do more of that there. I've worked at Vanguard focusing so specifically on mobile design and tablet design, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to learn more about finance so I can build confidence in my own financial knowledge. And at the same time, I started at Vanguard 2 months after I started to pursue a master's degree in information, majoring in HCI at the College of Computing and Informatics. And I specifically had the opportunity to take a course on AR and VR design and development. And so I thought, what better opportunity for my 6-month capstone project than to explore how to combine my 2 interests of AR and finance. So I sought out to ask this research question: do interactive AR data visualizations help people make better informed financial decisions? So to understand the landscape, I wanted to look at the data. So 35% of American adults use mobile AR as of 2024. Not a super high number, but it has significantly grown in the past several years. Now, 94% of Americans own a smartphone as of 2023, in comparison to only 23% of Americans owning a VR device as of 2024. So the reason then I wanted to create an experience for mobile AR is because so many Americans have a smartphone readily available. So I thought it would be the first step to bringing AR to the masses, but definitely wanting to grow to VR headset devices in the future. Also, keeping in mind, I knew my research projects were going to be remote asynchronous, so relying on people's hardware that they had at home with their mobile device would be a lot easier than trying to require people to use VR devices. It would be a much smaller pool of applicants. So now you may be thinking, like, why AR for data visualization, financial data visualizations? Like, what's the opportunity here? So in an industry study, they took traditional websites and compared it to a similar AR experience. So for example, shopping for furniture on IKEA.com or having an AR experience where you're shopping for furniture and also having the opportunity to place it augmentedly in your room. So they found that memory encoding is 70% higher with AR, which enhances retention and recall. Why might it enhance retention and recall? Well, AR offers multisensory experiences that engage visual, auditory, and tactile senses, which helps the brain's ability to process complex information. So now going into the research and design phase of my project, I identified 5 key steps that I knew I would need to complete in order to answer my research question. So there's the acumen survey, where I wanted to understand people's financial acumen. Then the next step would be to collect data based on what people wanted to learn more about. Then I would create 2 different graphs, a traditional 2D data visualization and an AR graph to compare in the later steps. Then the usability study to make sure that the graphs were user-friendly, and then the comparative test where I would put each graph like head to head and see which one performed better. So starting with the acumen survey. So the goal was to understand people's confidence in financial acumen. So I launched a 10-question survey on SurveyMonkey, and 123 people participated. And the results showed that people were least confident in asset allocation and most interested in learning how to grow their money. So if we take a look at investment steps, we can really narrow it down to 5 key steps. There's goal setting, which is understanding like, what you're saving your money for, what you want to achieve in the time period. There's assessing risk, usually low risk means low returns, high risk, high returns. Then asset allocation, understanding the amount of stocks, bonds, and cash you want to have in like your portfolio, meaning like what you own. Security selection, actually selecting those specific funds. And then monitoring, making sure your portfolio is performing as expected. So the survey revealed that people were most confident in goal setting, which makes sense. It's a very personal thing to do. And people were least confident in asset allocation. And then they were most interested in learning how to grow their money. I mean, who isn't? So here is some qualitative feedback. Some people were saying it's all a risk, like maybe not really having that much interest in learning about finance. And some other people said, I'm not very good at this, but I know it would help me out. So the data set collection. So I sought out to find data that could show the progress of like stocks, bonds, and cash over time, but it was very difficult to get access to raw data, even though we have so much of it around us, and so many websites and applications. Like getting the raw data is actually very difficult and often behind a paywall. So instead, I slightly pivoted and I wanted to focus on the S&P 500, which is a compilation of 503 stocks to show how risk and returns differs by sector. So I looked at 24 data points and I graphed on the y-axis the total returns and the x-axis risk look back. So I looked at that for 3, 5, 10, 15, and all time. And then each company was represented by a point. And when you tapped on the point, you could see information about the security, symbol, sector, and when it was founded. Oh, and also to mention on the z-axis, we had the sector. So the companies in the same sector were grouped together. Now for the visual design. So I used Tableau to create a traditional 2D data visualization, and then Flow Immersive, which is a no-code AR graph tool to build the AR experience. And then I just want to note that XR Browser is an app that is needed for iOS device users to experience the AR graph. So this was a little bit of a point of friction for our iOS users because they had an extra step for testing, whereas our Android users could experience the graph right directly in their browser without having to download something extra. So here we have the two graphs side by side, and I invite you to scan the QR code so you can test it out on your own devices. You can see everything is pretty similar. The colors for each of the sectors are the same, which also presented some difficulties, right? Because limited control over people's backgrounds for AR, so making sure it's like accessible as possible. You can see X, Y axis are the same. There's filters, and then the controls to move around are also as similar as possible. Yeah, and you can see with the AR graph, like you can really move into the data. It's very immersive. So instead of just having it flat on your screen, you can be in the center of it and really like immerse yourself in it. And then you can see as you're tapping on different data points, you can pull up that additional information. So the usability study. The goal here was to just test the usability of the AR and Tableau data visualizations. So I launched 37 tasks using Ballpark with 7 different people. Now, these people weren't specific to the US, it was global. So not everyone had familiarity with the S&P 500, but they were still able to provide feedback on, like I said, the usability. So from this, we learned about learn to update the color palette to make it as accessible as possible, reordering some of the tooltip information for better information digestion, and then providing some hint text for tappability, navigation, and filtering. We were a little bit limited in the UIs for both platforms, but tried to make it as simple as possible for the comparative test. So we weren't testing people's ability to use the graphs, but their actual ability to digest the information. And these were the 6 user tasks that were created to find that information. So we asked users, can you please explain the graph, describe the data points, identify the risk in return, like did they know to tap on the dot that they could find that information, evaluate the information you see in the tooltip, filter the data, and then navigate between graphs. And this was one piece of feedback that really stood out to me from the study. AR makes sense when you have an object which has details to see. I'm not sure if it works same for numbers and text. If the charts get less complicated, then AR works better. So dividing data into separate charts and show them with demand may make the magic for AR. And I think this is a great point and something that needs further exploration. Finding the right complexity for an augmented reality graph is something that needs to be studied further. So in the beginning, we know that research has shown AR can help people process complex information, but maybe there's a point where it gets too complex. So now to the final part, the comparative test. So here the goal, as it's explained, is to compare the AR graph to the Tableau data visualization. So there were 23 questions for the AR test and 20 questions for the Tableau test using SurveyMonkey. Only additional questions for AR because it was asking more about movement and the physicality aspect of AR tests, but there were 5 key questions that were the same for both tests. And there were 90 participants. And 4 out of the 5 questions were actually answered with greater accuracy using the AR graph compared to the Tableau graph. So here we can see more specific breakdown. So 28.89% said that a stock with high risk but low total returns would be placed on the bottom right of the graph. So see, AR is answering more accurately here. Again, AR is answering more accurately here at 58.89%, saying that a stock placed below the x-axis has a negative total return. Then again, the AR had 37.78%. Looking at the equity 3-year total returns and risk graph, NVIDIA has the greatest total return. This was the only instance where Tableau actually answered with greater accuracy at 14.44%. NVIDIA's total returns a decrease and risk decreases from 3 years to 5 years. And the final question with the AR group answering more accurately at 21.11%. Looking at the equity 3-year total returns and risk graph, the energy sector does not have negative total returns. And just to explain a little bit more, the highlighted bolded text was the answer to the question. So yeah, we can see here that only in one instance, the Tableau people taking the using the Tableau graph answered with greater accuracy. So then when we asked participants if they would want to interact with financial data in this format again, about half for each group said that they would want to. Why only about 52, 53%? This could be for a few reasons. One, the AR was exciting. It was something new and novel that they want to learn more about. On the other hand, it could be too complicated, too complex. There's a learning curve that they're just not used to this yet. And similar to Tableau, this is something that they're familiar with. It might be a little bit more boring. Been there, seen that, right? But at the same time, the Tableau graph, with limitations of the software, it wasn't really optimized for mobile. You had to horizontally scroll and wasn't really an idea for understanding. And also the data was really compressed on the screen and overlapping. So again, something to consider and continuously improve for future designs and comparative tests. So we can see the feedback for the AR graph. It's too confusing. I'm not a developer. I need a tutorial. It looks fun. But then on the flip side, it was easy to understand. It would be nice if it were an actual VR headset. Whereas feedback for the Tableau graph, I'm more of a visual person, but I find this type of graph to be more difficult to interact and make solid decisions from. It's incredibly hard to parse as it appears visually cluttered and confusing. But then someone else said, the graphs are some of the easiest to read and understand that I've ever reviewed. So definitely a mixed bag. So discussion. Some of the challenges that I faced, this was research that I had to fund on my own. I did not have any funding from Vanguard or Drexel, and research gets very expensive very quickly, I'm sure, as many of you know. So also having to balance like time and money. I was able to do my research on research platforms that are available, but and that's helpful because you can get a large sample of people pretty quickly instead of doing it in person, which can take a little bit more time. Accessing financial data was also difficult. A lot of it was behind a paywall. It's also very complex and difficult to understand the nuance of financial data. Access to good research software. Unfortunately, like user testing doesn't provide licenses for individuals anymore, only large companies. So I had to rely on some smaller providers that weren't as good. And because of that, the quality of the participant data could have been better. Like we have the people that participated, not all of them are interested in finance. Some of them have never heard of the S&P 500. So it'd probably be better to have a more focused user group in the future instead of casting such a wide net, even though this really could be for anyone who is just starting out in their financial journey or is more advanced. And with that, just bring to next steps. So this is currently the Vanguard application research page. So if you wanted to search for a product like VOO, it's an ETF. This is the data you would expect to find on that an ETF screen. Some data points, some graphs. And so how would we be able to incorporate AR and show historical total risk and returns? So this is like a mobile optimized data visualization, similar to that of the Tableau graph. And then maybe there's like an opportunity to then switch to view in AR, which you can see here. So giving users both the option to interact with data in both a traditional setting and augmented reality setting. And I just want to say thank you to the PhillyCHI board for selecting me to present today. I want to congratulate the other presenters. I'm excited to hear their talks. And I want to thank you as the audience for listening. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the spotlighting.
Yeah, that's great. We're going to enter our Q&A portion with Angie. So yeah, any questions? Jonathan, take it away with the questions.
All right, for our first question, how were you able to make a AR prototype with the graph? Could you explain, please, the process, how you were able to achieve it?
Yeah, great question. So I use this, I I use this tool called Flow Immersive. You could go to flowimmersive.com. You could, it's not a free tool to use, so you would have to contact them to get a paid license, but they are very friendly towards students to create accounts. And then I would say there's like a lot of similarities to Tableau. There's like some drag and drop features in the bottom panel, and then on the right hand panel, there's like opportunities to like change colors, adjust like which data is mapped to the X and Y axis. So a low code solution, and I think it was pretty user friendly.
For our second question, what alts to user testing did you find?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it one more time?
What alts to user testing did you find?
Oh, yeah. So there was really no, unfortunately for like the user testing, I wasn't able to have people screen record. Screen recording was only available on laptop devices or like desktop devices, and I needed people to do it on their mobile device. So there was no way to screen the software Ballpark, didn't allow screen recording on mobile devices. So there was no way to really confirm that people were actually looking at the graphs. And going through it, like all the data that I presented to you is like accurately represented based on what I received from users, but there's no way to know that they actually took the time to look at the graph. I tried my best to filter it out as much as possible and ask questions like, are you looking at the graph? But even then, sometimes people would say yes, and then later on say, I didn't actually open the graph. Um, and also then you might ask, like, why did I use a software like Ballpark instead of something else that allowed screen recording? Again, it was an issue with money. Like research gets like really expensive really quickly. So anytime you try to add in any type of like participant criteria, like has to have a financial account or has to be at this age, like the price dramatically increases.
How did you recruit for this? Was there specific outreach to get global participation in the usability tests?
Yeah, great question. So for the acumen survey and the comparative test, I use SurveyMonkey. And if you can pay, so you have to pay SurveyMonkey, right, to use their software, but then you can pay an additional price to use their user populations. So they'll send out the survey to people for you. And SurveyMonkey was actually pretty good because they use like US Census demographic data. So having a balanced gender mix, US like census mix for race. So that was good in that sense. But like if I wanted to add a question about, again, like, do you have any financial accounts at any like financial firms, that would be a very costly like pre-screener question. Um, Ballpark was very limited in their ability to see like the population. So I think it would have with the yeah, with SurveyMonkey was only for US, but Ballpark they casted a wider net, and I think there were some people from the UK and maybe even some people from Africa. I don't know for sure, but then like in those cases like the S&P 500, while it is like globally known, it might be like less well known in other countries compared to the US. So
Um,
definitely opportunities for more focused participants in the future with more resources.
Great. And for your last question, uh, what was the timeline to achieve all of this? How long did it take you to complete it? And if you had the time and money, what would you do next with this project?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you so much. So this was a 6-month project. I maybe a little bit longer than 6 months. So I started officially in January of this year and finished in like mid-June. I spent some of December doing some like pre-work, getting the idea together. Um, originally I was going to try to get like IRB approval to go through like academic publishing, which is like why also I wasn't able to get IRB approval because the timeline was just it takes 10 plus weeks to get that approval, and I only had 6 months to do the whole project, so it would have just taken way too long. So that's also part of the reason why I went with the Survey Monkey and Ballpark instead of just like asking people, because if I asked people, I couldn't publish the data. But the pro of being able to use tools like that is casting a wider net, right? Like I'm not going to be able to get like 90 people to take my survey just by like putting it on Facebook or like sharing it on social media. So, and also I got results within like 24 hours, like getting like 100 people to respond within 24 hours. So very quick turnaround. Um, yeah, I'm actively trying to continue this project at Vanguard. I've shared it with them and I'm hoping to have them provide funding. So I would like to do the research with a more focused group on people who are actually interested in finance, because some of these people really did not care about finance or learning more about it. They just wanted to do a survey, which, I respect that. They wanted to do their survey. Um, and then I think long term, I would like to compare the AR experience to like a VR experience. So, or even like an AR experience with a headset, right? Because just holding it on your mobile device is pretty limited. But if you have a headset on, like the Apple Vision Pro, you have like a much wider viewport for seeing the data projected in the physical world. So, who knows? Maybe in the future, I'll come back and I'll have more to share on this topic.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you
Loved
so much
it.
for presenting. I personally want to know how usability testing works in a like VR headset realm. Haven't quite gotten to that in my journey. All right, so next up, we're gonna hear it from. Okay, hold on, sorry. Camila Quintana. I'm just gonna have you share your screen. I had the slide up, but I think that you
Okay.
also have an introductory slide, so it's
Yeah.
prettier anyway. But yeah.
Let's see then. Oh. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So before I start, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself. I am a designer with a background in strategy, service design, and design systems. And in my last role, which is the one that I will be talking about here in the presentation, I led the redesign of the production and translation of the publishing materials in the company, making it grow by 525%. And I also contributed to the creation of a design system for 6 bilingual platforms. I am currently working at Johnson & Johnson for the XD chapter. And I work with the design of 2 platform integrations to aid users in the tracking of data on mitigation of risks and quality control. So a lot of numbers, nothing too too crazy. Okay, so for here we have the title of my project, which is the boosting the book production by 525% for 1.5 million bilingual students. And today we'll tell you more about this case because I am really proud of it. And I'm proud of it not only because of the outcome, but all the relationships it helped to build internally with the teams involved in it. So initially, who is American Reading Company? American Reading Company, or ARC for short. It is a curriculum designing company that provides language arts solutions in both English and Spanish for grades K to 12. And they work with 500 schools and districts across the country, reaching a total of 1.5 million students with books and other learning resources. ARC has several departments that together create the content that they needed for the literacy efforts. But for now, I'm going to focus particularly on ARC Press, which was the department that I belong to. ARC Press is a publishing house. It's a tool is a tool used to upkeep three main goals, and those are maintaining margins to offer the best price possible to schools, helping furthering the one-on-one parity efforts between English and Spanish on all of their content, and helping filling the gaps when it comes to outdated, unavailable, or non-diverse books. ARC really wanted to be part of the learning process of students like Curly, which we're going to talk in just a few, but that meant having the capacity to offer a lot more resources in Spanish. So the goal was to make sure all content was equal parts available in English and in Spanish for all students. To make that happen, I was going to have to understand, first of all, what was the current process and what was needed to create more products in Spanish. So here, when it comes to Curly, she was one of our English second language students, and she came to the country without knowing the language. But thanks to the availability of learning courses in both languages, she was able to go to classes and learn on par with her classmates, but just in a different language. It is important to just give reassurance to kids that not knowing the language does not mean you're starting from zero. They already have pre-existing knowledge. They just don't have that medium to express it. Towards the end of Curly's first year, she challenged herself to write a book on a topic from one of her classes, fully in English, and she did such a great job that her teacher contacted us for for a student author program, and I got to work with her in the publishing of her book, which she also translated herself. So now, before I'm starting, I really wanted to understand how the established process worked, like I had already mentioned, and how did it look for the different departments that were involved in it. So for this, I had to identify who was involved, and there didn't really seem to be a clear understanding of this. So little by little, I started putting together the puzzle pieces. For my interview, I started with the people that I knew were involved, like designers, art directors, and editors. And when I asked them, where do I even start? Like, who do I even reach out to? They in turn put me in contact with the people in charge of the books in Spanish at that moment, and who in turn also sent me to the VP of Spanish Learning, who introduced me several of the other people involved in writing content and curating it. To those directly involved in selecting the books that go into classrooms, I asked questions like what challenges are present with the current state of the Spanish catalog. And I also asked stakeholders to tell me what the book production process looked like end to end, because I just really needed to see what was their understanding of the end-to-end process. And that way I could more easily spot where the confusion began. To those like Maru who were involved in the translation, I asked to describe their role in the process and also what they've done so far to fix the parts that they felt weren't working. Her journey was particularly interesting because she was very eager to help, but also very quickly frustrated because as you can see, she had the understanding of the steps after she was done writing, but not necessarily the tools to get to these steps. After conducting field studies and interviews, I noticed some patterns, and this allowed me to group their feedback in four major groups, which were the issues with relationships between departments, the lack of understanding of deadlines, the issues with communication, and the purpose and use of the product. With these insights in mind, I focused on some main takeaways, which were that the stakeholders had a very skewed understanding of the process or had their own version altogether, that the purpose for content as a tool to aid students was very clear for everyone, and that stakeholders didn't know which person was responsible for what part of the process, and that was like a big part of the disconnect. Oh, I forgot to put the legend in here, but the little flames are the parts that were struggling. So before I jumped to the initial design, I wanted to have a visual aid of the data that I had gathered and how it helped shape what should technically be the actual structure of the process. So with this, I found it was also important to cover the English book process because Spanish translations stem from those resources. And unknowingly, this data visualization would be a great tool to come back to for reference after several iterations. So this was the initial prototype, and it became the company's first ever attempt at standardizing a process. It helped us have clarity on the steps involved in creating new books, as it marked who was assigned to a specific task, who was the editor, and who was going to make any correction, which was an issue that I had not anticipated up to that point. I then realized we would need two of them to properly address stakeholders' feedback. And this was an initial solution, but what was the standard for localization in itself? After using Leap for roughly 3 months and with users presenting comfortable rates of adoption, I reviewed what aspects were helpful and what needed improvement for further iteration. With this, I identified 2 things that needed to change, which was the revisions to category. This presented some confusion as these steps were content review steps that needed to be completed before a full approval of the translation, and the book corrections to items that were unnecessarily redundant and included in the approval process below it. After adjusting the rubric and implementing the new version for projects, I started discussing the possibility of moving this artifact to a digital setting to make access to it faster. And little did we know that we were going to have to do it anyway, because this was right at the start of the pandemic, and ARC was one of the first companies to send everyone home. Creating the rubric digitally was no longer a consideration, like I had just said. It was a reality. It needed to happen without a doubt. So I created a prototype that would adapt to the contents of the rubric we had, while at the same time giving us the option to work with extra features. And these features would be like the project this book belonged to, notes on the specifics of this project, checklist with the steps already covered, and a section for comments between the team working together on the book. One issue that I had already noticed after iterations from the previous printed version was that the team didn't have a tool to keep track of all the books that they were working on simultaneously, and they often relied on notes they kept by themselves for the tracking of this. So this new digital environment opened the gates to a solution for this issue with the creation of a dashboard. This was the dashboard for English projects, or rather the design dashboard. And while the English production process was reliant on just ArcPress, it needed some serious help to adapt to a digital environment. So with the knowledge of stakeholders involved and feedback from testing from the localization dashboard, which was somewhat a parallel for this one, I developed a tool that was geared towards making sure every project with an active status was ready to send to our printers, so we could then deliver it to students that required them. Books from the localization dashboard, which looked very similar to this one, would migrate here once they were done, once they were translated as the design correction process that they went through was exactly the same one as those in the English section of things. So this dashboard helped reduce the amount of books that fell through the cracks, since sometimes projects involved over 50 books and some would inevitably be forgotten without a system to track them. These also significantly reduce the amount of errors that would cause penalty fees with our printers, because then again, things were being tracked and they were all present in a centralized source of information. And and that, of course, helped that to make sure like now all the corrections of a book were documented, and we would just be successful at a higher rate when editing the books. So this entire process helped with making departments and their stakeholders aware of each other, and now they knew who to ask from each department for help should they need it. With the documentation standards crafted to this design, it was easier also to onboard new hires and get them familiarized with not only the books, but their part in the process. It also opened channels of communication and constant feedback loops, as I encouraged recurrent meetings for general updates and also critiques. From the beginning, these meetings were also helped us discuss best practices and how to make the adoption of the process easier for teams. And as I made sure stakeholders were heavily involved, the welcoming environment for feedback also made them more comfortable with bringing up features and suggesting updates that would benefit their teams. Like when the operations team asked if there was a way to track data on how many times has a book been sent to press. And this process allowed ArcPress to effectively and consistently work towards its goals, the initial ones that I had mentioned for ArcPress, and the amount of new Spanish products went from about 12 to 75 a year, which means there were a lot of expensive materials and imported ones from external vendors that we could not replace. These 525 increase in production allowed the company to save $38.5 million. And of course, more books meant more tools for students, and we could now offer students more topics to learn from and more books to learn them through, planting the seeds for their love for reading. And that is it.
Awesome. Let me add Jonathan in here for some questions.
All right. For your first question, did you use sorry. Did you use a task management system that ARC already used? Or did you have to find a new tool or build something new for this system design?
So technically, several of the teams use different management tools like Jira and stuff like that, but they weren't very consistent, and they were also not like all departments were working as silos. So my job was basically not only designing a tool that would work for everyone, but a tool that they were all willing to use so they could be aware of what like everyone was doing. Like, okay, we need to send these books to press by August. Where are the items? So like there was a constant monitoring of the process. So the creation of the dashboard in itself with all its moving parts was from scratch. And as you could see, since a lot of the people working there were very set on their ways, the adoption was rather slow. So this entire thing took about, I want to say 3 years, with the initial one being on paper that it just came attached to the printed product. And then once we moved digital, it was just a little tricky to try and figure out which platform would they be more comfortable to adapt together as like all the teams working towards this. But then at to like the end of last year, the plan was to actually integrate all this on their own custom-made CRM system, because they already had one for the warehouse. So it would just be like even better to integrate the operations needs to all of this in the background.
What led to stakeholder buy-in? How did you sell the idea to them?
Well, this was pretty hard, and initially the BP of Spanish, she didn't really like me because she was the one that designed this system and it worked for her. But the problem was that yes, the system worked when they were printing maybe 3, 4 books a year, but not at the size that we were, like our ambitions were leading us to. So, and that's something that I always do. And okay, maybe I'm finding resistance, but I really like to talk to people and understand where is this resistance coming from. So, she thought I was kind of imposing this solution on her. So with a lot of conversation and meetings and regarding what we were going to do to make sure we could actually achieve these goals, I left it very clear for her to understand that this wasn't straight jacket, like this, her opinion and her solutions and her input on this was going to be very important to me as well. And once she started understanding that and doing that, she ended up being one of my biggest advocates for with upper management and C-suite.
Oh, wow, that's great. Um, could you tell us a bit more about your process bringing a story to life that had so many people and moving parts?
Yeah, I think that was what took me the longest. And it was because I didn't initially start as a UX designer with this company. I was a bilingual designer for books and particularly their printed products. But very quickly, I realized this was a huge need. And that's when it turned slowly into a more UX role. So initially I needed to figure out, like learn all the ropes and figure out who were the ones working on this, why were we printing so few Spanish books, who was the one making the Spanish books, where were they being written, how did they get to design, and where was that process in the back and forth that was lacking in order to get this process going. Because a lot of the books were like, oh yeah, I left it on your desk, and that was it, and people would forget because there was no proper way to track like who has it and how long has it been there. Are you correcting it or did you just write it? Like there was no like proper way to do that, and people have other projects on top of this, so it was just a very overwhelming amount on of information that was not regulated at all. So that was the first thing, like figuring out who are my people. And like, as I started also developing the solutions, more people, I would start finding out about a lot more people. So that was also an interesting part of like, oh yeah, maybe this person collaborates like every quarter, but like their input is very important to operations, or their input is very important for the teaching and learning team who design the teaching methods for classrooms. So that's why it took the longest, because then again, like these groups were working as silos and they knew what kind of their teams were doing, but they didn't really know what the other one was doing at all. So building those bridges was the hardest part.
Camilla, thank you so much. A lot of people are celebrating the work that you do here in the chat. I think we'll move on to Casey, and we'll move on to the next presenter.
Hey guys, once again. Yeah, so time for our last presenter. I'm gonna do this right this time. Here we go. Boom. Hannah Strayline. You might recognize her from AIGA Philly as the mentorship coordinator chair. Sorry, I don't know what your titles are there. You can, what did
Mentorship.
you say?
I am mentorship director.
Mentorship director. Sounds fancier. She's going to be talking about Don't Put Me on Hold, the evolution of call transfer, currently a senior product designer at Microsoft. Take it away. Take it away.
Let me get this screen share up. Can we see?
Yes.
We can see.
Perfect. So, don't put me on hold, the evolution of call transfer. So, let me just skip over here. Obviously work for Microsoft now, but many moons ago, I was a UX UI designer for Comcast Business Voice. So that was governing all of the landline services that business owners had through Comcast, whether they were enterprise or small businesses. And so we had portals for the different settings that the physical phones would connect to. So a feature that was really requested throughout my time there was something that was analog that became digital called key system emulation. And what is a key system to begin with? That is exactly what you see here. When you had the operators back in the day, plugging things into the board, connecting people to each other, calling one person, making sure that they were ready to accept your call, that is a key system. So how do you emulate that in more of a digital sense? On a modern phone, it became more of like parking a call, putting someone on hold on a predetermined phone extension line, letting the second user pick up anywhere else in maybe that building or maybe a different area, without needing to do a transfer, which often caused phone calls to drop. So going through this process, there were obviously things that we were going up against, going from an analog process to a digital one. The fact that pretty much everybody on the team was below the age of 35 was a big one. I myself am 29 and I had never used an office phone. None of us had. We mostly had been remote workers. So there were also too many cooks in the kitchen. Out of all of the people on the team, we had 2 product managers, a project manager, a design lead that was also in the ether that we had to connect with for the 2 different sides of this portal. We had 2 designers and a researcher. So with all of those voices in the mix, we really had to jump into like a discovery phase, just doing a little bit of UX research to get started on this project. Especially when I landed on the project, they had stalled in research. They really couldn't figure out what this process was like. And when you work at Comcast, it is a little bit of a cyclical process when it comes to more of this double diamond process. So let's go through the loop-de-loop. So who do you call when you need to do some research? Not the Ghostbusters, you call your subject matter experts. My favorite was Cowboy Russ. He looked pretty much like this. This is not him. But he was such a wonderful asset to have. He was a trainer that would travel to different businesses to set up these phone lines. It was a service that you could pay for if you weren't able to do it yourself. So he was training all of our like business owners or managers on these systems. And he was really well versed in office phones, having been only slightly older than 35. And he also wore a cowboy hat to every single one of our calls because he would call us from a different hotel every week. So once we were talking to him about his experience and how these office phones worked versus what we understood of perhaps the mobile phones that we had, we were able to put together this really long user flow. That was basically what this system was going to look like. We were able to visualize this enough for both our development director and our business director to be able to follow through and approve that this was the process they wanted us to follow. I'm not going to get too much into that. It gets a little hairy, but with the designs, we were able to turn that user flow into a wireframe. Now, there were many different iterations of these wireframes. We did a little bit of research in between because research is also a cyclical process by sending out different wireframes to different trainers to see what they thought to make sure that everybody was on the same page, both in the field and in the office. So this was our parking spot. You have to assign a extension number to where you're going to park or put this call on hold on your physical device. So once you have your parking spots created, then you have to configure the actual device. Now you could do this either by clicking on the phone, but it was easier to do it online. So this was our original concept of wireframes for just, selecting the device that you wanted to upload this information to and trying to mimic what the phone looked like online so that it wasn't super confusing for our customers who didn't have trainers, and then configuring all of those options. So getting into developing and maintaining, we were able to develop something that looked like this. We also were checking out where to put this on our side nav here. Just thinking about visual hierarchy, what was most important, putting all of our other features that were about hold in the same place, because these parking spots could be leveraged by the other parts of the system. So yeah, we were able to put them in a really nice
clean system with a slide out option here to type in either both the name and the extension. And because sometimes people got a little hung up on what that extension number should be, we've created an auto generate extension button. And from there, we were able to get into the configuration of it. So this was a full screen wizard, sort of like a modal, where you would select the devices that were available. So you wanted to put exam room 1 and Dr. James in the same configuration. You would select those, and then you would be able to start assigning those parking spots from the screen before here. And we really needed to mimic what the phone looked like while also letting people know that some phones have 25 lines, like the touchscreen one on the left, but some of the phones are smaller and they only had 4 lines. So if you were going to have differing amounts of lines, you needed to have a little bit of a warning just to let them know they weren't going to get everything. So yeah, these were the polycoms that we were working with for the most part. And then deploying this was a little bit funny. We obviously worked with our developers very closely on the settings, and there's something called a reminder tone. So when you are put on hold and the receptionist is talking to the doctor to make sure that they are ready to accept your call, you have a reminder tone that will play on the phone to remind you that someone's on hold. And so me and a developer, Rajesh, sat down for 2 hours and did all the math that we could possibly think of to make this work, because there was also a repeat reminder tone, which were contingent on each other. So that was a lot of math, and I'm so glad that Rajesh was able to figure it out. So from there, we had 56% early adopters when we launched this out to all of our customers. It was about 40,000 people. And yeah, we didn't get a lot of feedback other than that, but it was a highly requested feature, so we were able to get through it. All right, anything more you'd like to know? That's pretty much the long and short of it.
Awesome. Trying to figure out how to spotlight again. Ah, okay. I think someone needs to be on video for me to spotlight them. Good timing, Jonathan.
All right. So Hannah, so this was a product that was not just internally, it was something that Comcast gave to other businesses.
Yes, so if you were a doctor's office, an automotive shop, if you had a hair salon, if you had a phone number through Comcast, it would be probably a landline, something that would sit at a reception desk or just like something in a business office, like a back office. And so these devices were mostly used. There is technically a mobile version of this, but we weren't in charge of that.
Hmm. Uh, so you mentioned doctors. Were medical organizations a primary customer base? Were there any other customer bases that you focused on?
Those were just the examples that we used to help get buy-in from both our business and development directors, just because it was a very difficult process to follow. Being able to point out, like, there's a receptionist who's working the front desk who's taking calls, and there's a doctor who is in another room with another phone line in his particular office, and being able to transfer that call, more so put them on hold up in the cloud, and then the doctor can go and grab that call. But we didn't look into what businesses specifically, just because Comcast is very touchy about customer data. So we did have to go through our research person assigned to us to even get any of this data.
Were any minor details the users would get hung up on because of the systems didn't meet their exact mental model?
Yes, it was actually a lot of trouble around language. So obviously, you and I, on a normal basis, don't understand what key system emulation means. We went back and forth a lot on what to call that. That's why in the navigation on the side, it's called call hold, since it's a type of hold. We did a lot of research around that, like card sorting and lexicon research. So when we were doing our user testing, that was the one thing everybody pointed out. They're like, I don't even know where to begin because I don't know what this is. After doing a little bit more research with actual Comcast customers, we found out that the managers were very used to this terminology, just having worked at many different businesses where they were in charge of phone lines, or this was a little bit of a set and forget setting within that whole system. So our trainers were the ones that really had to understand what those nuances were and would just set it, and the customer would never have to change it. So once we were able to really figure out who our like target demographic was in this, it became a little bit less of a hang up.
How big was the team working on this?
So we had two design leads, one that was directly in charge of us, one that was in charge of the actual device. So the screen is customizable on some of these phones. And then there was myself, another designer, and a researcher. That was just like our design team. Then we had out in the ether, we had our development director, business director, two product managers, one who was in charge of the portal itself as the product manager, and then one in charge of the physical device, and yeah, and a project manager. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of people to please.
A lot of personalities. Um, how were you able to obtain the data or surveys to come up with the final product?
So the one thing that Comcast didn't really give us a lot of hard time on was speaking to their trainers. So when we were using, I believe it was Airtable, we were able to send out a form through that to a specific list of trainers to look at our two designs for wireframes. They were able to tell us what they liked about it. We created an affinity map that got deleted when someone was laid off, so it was a little annoying, but yeah, we just reached out to them in particular because they were the people we had access to.
Now, I noticed on the phone displayed it had a button and it said D&D. Did Comcast create something that someone could click on it and get a quick game of Dungeons and Dragons?
Do not disturb.
Well, that's all of our questions that we have. I'll pass it along over to Casey.
I was muted. Okay. Hey everyone, thanks again for joining in for the lovely, PhillyCHI Show and Tell 2024. Let's give it up for that. Let's go. Woo! Yeah, that was like kind of weak. Maybe unweak. You guys want.
Yay!
Yay!
Right on, go birds.
Yeah. Don't worry, we're gonna get you guys gone just in time for the birds, but we have something a little bit